Amelia Hart had always believed life moved in careful, orderly steps. She kept lists, calendars, and little notes tucked into the pages of a worn notebook she carried like armor. At 39, she had learned to balance deadlines. A small apartment that smelled faintly of lemon, and the memory of a life that felt both lived and paused. Her job at Northbridge Creative was steady. Her paycheck was real. Her pride in a job done well was quiet and deep. She was the kind of person people trusted to fix things others could not see were broken. Across the open plan office sat Sebastian Reed, the creative director. He had a presence that people noticed before they could name it. He listened like he was collecting stories, and he spoke in a way that made complicated things feel simple. His hair had a few silver threads at the temples, and his laugh was rare and therefore treasured. People respected him. Amelia respected him too. Not because he demanded it, but because he never asked for more than what work deserved. There was also Mara, who always arrived early with a paper cup and a stack of witty comments. And Hugo, who kept the office plants alive and told terrible jokes to make the rest of them laugh. Lena, who managed logistics, was the calm anchor. These were the small constellations around which Amelia navigated her days. 1. Rainy Thursday evening, Amelia sat alone at her desk, the office lights casting long rectangles on the carpet. She had promised a friend she would send a note of thanks for a favor. Exhausted and slightly sentimental, she typed, sometimes people look ordinary until you see them in a certain light. Sebastian is one of those rare men who looks like he has learned how to carry the world with kindness. He is quietly beautiful and safe in a way that makes you breathe easier. She smiled at the screen, then reached for the wrong email thread. The whoosh of the sent message sliced the quiet. Amelia felt her stomach fall. She had sent the message to Sebastian by mistake. For a moment, the world held its breath. She clicked recall with the furious hope of reversing time. The software replied with the sterile phrase that offered no comfort. She sat there, palms slightly damp. The office suddenly too loud with the sound of her own. Heartbeat morning arrived with a gray light and an inner ache that made her move like someone walking through memory. She rehearsed apologies, explanations, and the kinds of small confessions that might make a space less awkward. The elevator doors opened on the 20th floor like a stage curtain. Furtive glances met hers. Laughter tried to be casual and failed. People had noticed the message ping at her desk. A note waited from Sebastian. It said simply, "Coffee, 15 minutes. No lecture, no shaming." Amelia read it twice, thinking perhaps she was already dreaming the sort of kindness people reserved for novels. She walked toward the break room with a mixture of dread and a strangely warm thread of curiosity. The conversation began like a careful dance. He spoke about the campaign they were launching, then about a minor annoyance with the office coffee machine. His voice never pulled at the confession. It was gentle and unhurried. He said, "You have good instincts, Amelia. Sometimes a misplaced sentence tells me more about a person than 1,000 careful emails." She wanted to disappear and be brave at the same time. His eyes were not the hot film kind that made people gawk. They were steady, interested, as if he hoped to understand, not to judge. After that morning, things shifted in quiet ways. People who had turned to gossip chose to be unusually polite. A few colleagues asked Amelia about the weekend with a new softness. Mara teased her kindly, which was almost worse because it came with affection. Hugo brought an extra plant with a tiny note that read, "For the one who keeps things growing." Amelia found herself smiling more and worrying less about appearances. But beneath the warmth, a thread of fear twined through her. She had learned the hard way that good things were fragile. She had been single for years, keeping her life steady and private. A mistake like this felt dangerous because it opened doors she had kept closed. She caught herself watching Sebastian from across the room, noticing how he took coffee black and how he frowned when a font was off in a mock-up. His attention to small things made her appreciate him more, and it also made her afraid he might see too. Clearly the parts of her she guarded. Then one evening, an anonymous envelope arrived on her desk. It held a simple photograph of a coastline at dawn with a note on the back that read, "For when you forget how vast the world is." There was no name. Amelia felt the photograph like a touch. She thought of how small the office felt sometimes and how the sea looked on vacations long ago. The mystery felt like a promise and a warning. The weeks that followed, braided, professional and personal in ways Amelia did not expect. Sebastian began inviting her to review pieces that needed a second eye. Sometimes they stayed late, looking over copy, discussing tone, voice, and the fine art of saying nothing heavy in a light sentence. He listened to her talk about projects as if her words mattered for themselves, not for how they would impress him. This surprised her. It also made her heart feel like it was learning an unfamiliar language. One afternoon, during a particularly tense meeting with a client who wanted everything immediate and brilliant, Amelia watched Sebastian navigate the room. He diffused anger with a question. He turned certainty into curiosity with a single phrase. She saw how he made others feel safe and competent. Later, when the office emptied, he walked her to the elevator and said, "I hope the mistake did not cost you any peace." She laughed, which surprised them both. She answered honestly, "It bought me new perspective." He smiled and the sound was soft. The mistake had been an accident, but it had opened a door. Amelia felt the world tilt, not with catastrophe, but with possibility. She thought of the photograph on her desk and how the sea seemed willing to hold more than she had expected. She also felt the whisper of caution, an old memory that told her to protect herself. Yet something in Sebastian's presence encouraged her to test the edges of that caution. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "I will be brave enough to learn how to let life surprise me without giving up my center." It was a small vow, and the paper held it like a promise. She went to bed feeling both terrified and strangely ready. The next day would bring more changes, conversations, and perhaps an answer to why an anonymous photograph had arrived. She did not know. She only knew that the quiet of her life now contained a new hum, and that hum felt like the beginning of a story she had not expected to be in. After the photograph arrived, Amelia found herself wondering who was orchestrating these quiet acts. The office had become a subtle stage for gestures she could not place. A book left on her chair with a bookmark at a hopeful passage. A cup placed carefully on her desk with a miniature origami boat inside. Each small thing was like a line of a poem meant for her alone. She began to look for patterns, as if detectiveship could soften the surprise. Sebastian's behavior remained composed and kind, never theatrical. One afternoon he assigned her to lead a pitch that had been floundering. It was a vote of confidence that made her hands tremble with equal parts gratitude and fear. She prepared like someone writing an apology and a proclamation at once. The night before, she found herself rehearsing in the mirror and realizing that she had a voice she had used less than she should have. The pitch day came, and Amelia stood at the front of a room filled with skeptical clients and colleagues who expected the usual corporate script. She told the story of the brand as if she were unwrapping it, piece by piece. She used language that felt human, simple, honest. When the clients leaned forward, she felt something rare and pure, connection. Afterwards, Sebastian put his hand on her shoulder in public, a small gesture that said more than applause. She saw surprise in the eyes of others, but also respect. Yet the mystery continued. The anonymous gifts grew more personal. A letter arrived with no return address. Inside, the writer thanked her for small kindnesses she had shown in the hallway last winter. The letter spoke of seeing her patience with a new hire, of the warmth in the way she treated the receptionist, and the respect she gave to an intern. The writer wrote that Amelia's steady presence had kept them from making a decision that would have harmed their life. The letter ended with a single sentence: "Sometimes we are saved by people who do not know they are saving us." Reading that note, Amelia felt both humbled and unsettled. She had always believed kindness was its own reward, but the note revealed the ripple effect of small acts. She thought about the life she had constructed, steady, careful, private. She had not thought of herself as someone who shaped the lives of others. Yet the letter suggested otherwise. She began to notice tiny ways she influenced people. A word of encouragement that brightened a day. Correction delivered with dignity instead of humiliation. Sebastian noticed the change. He began sharing his own stories, not the polished versions used in meetings, but honest fragments of his past. He spoke of a parent who had taught him the value of listening and of a rejection early in his career that taught him more than a promotion could. These confessions came in small doses, like sunlight through blinds. Amelia felt fortunate and cautious. She shared a little of herself, too. At the time, she had chosen stability over risk, and the quiet grief she carried for chances not taken. As seasons turned, their conversations deepened. They began to speak about dreams with frankness. Amelia confessed that she wanted to write more, to stop saving her sentences for margins. Sebastian admitted he feared being known for his title rather than for who he was when not performing. Their shared vulnerabilities created a bridge. It was not a sky full of fireworks. It was a steady light that made both feel safer. Rumors swirled, of course. People noticed the way they laughed together and drew conclusions in quiet corners. Amelia learned how to hold her ground against gossip with the same gentle firmness she used on presentations. She answered questions with short truths and refused to be defined by a single misfired message. She discovered a quiet strength in shaping the narrative of her own life. Then one night a crisis struck the company. A major client threatened to withdraw, and panic moved through the office like a wave. Deadlines compressed, and tempers frayed. Amelia found herself coordinating a response, calling people, smoothing tensions, rearranging priorities. She worked with a calm that surprised even her. Sebastian watched her with a respect that felt like a shield. Together they navigated the chaos, and in the aftermath the company stayed afloat. After that storm, the anonymous gestures intensified in ways that felt almost ceremonial. A small wooden box appeared on Amelia's desk with a note that read, "For the moments you forget your own courage." Inside were items that suggested someone knew the contours of her life: a ticket stub from a play she had once loved, a pressed flower that matched the shade of a scarf her mother had given her, and a tiny key with no visible lock. Amelia realized the gifts were not merely tokens. They were invitations to remember and to open something inside herself. The presence of the unknown giver created a tension between fear and curiosity. Who watched and noticed the soft patterns of her kindness? Was it someone in the office, or a stranger who had been touched by what she did? The question felt intimate, as if someone had read pages of her heart. She tried to be practical and ask the right people, but answers were elusive. One evening, Sebastian found her standing by the window, the city a quilt of lights below. He stood beside her and did not speak. After a while, he asked gently, "Would you like to know who sent the last gift?" She turned to him, heart quick. He smiled and said, "I will tell you if you promise to keep some mysteries." The levity eased the tension, and Amelia felt a warmth that was not curiosity alone. She nodded. He told her a story about a woman he once knew, who used small acts to keep hope alive in his life when he needed it most. He did not reveal names or specifics. He simply said that sometimes people choose to be kind without asking for recognition. She felt both comforted and skeptical. He looked at her with an expression that asked permission to be a companion without possession in private. Their moments grew intimate but respectful. A touch of the hand while passing a folder, a look that acknowledged the shape of the other's day. Amelia found herself writing more, capturing small truths. She submitted an idea for a campaign that celebrated ordinary kindness. Sebastian supported it and helped shape the narrative. When the campaign launched, it connected with audiences in ways the team had only hoped for. People wrote letters echoing Amelia's own anonymous note. The office celebrated, and Amelia felt a sense of purpose that extended beyond her desk. Yet even as her professional star rose, Amelia wrestled with the question of defining love and the fear of losing self and affection. She tested boundaries, asking herself how she could remain steady while allowing tenderness to grow. She spoke with Lena about hope and with Hugo about courage. Their conversations became a quiet choir that reinforced her sense of self. The mystery of the anonymous giver remained unsolved, but it had changed the way Amelia saw the world. She began to believe that small acts mattered more than grand gestures. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "I will be brave enough to let tenderness enter my life and wise enough to keep my center." It was a promise that tasted like summer rain. She folded the page and carried it like a map. The weeks that followed felt like a season of learning. Amelia discovered that love, when it arrives slowly, teaches patience. She and Sebastian moved forward with careful steps. Their friendship deepened into a companionship that held room for both work and quiet. He introduced her to music he loved, and she showed him poems that had lived in her notebook for years. They learned each other's little rituals. She made him strong coffee in the mornings, and he left a note with a line from a poem on her desk from time to time. One evening, after a long day, they walked together along the river. The city lights traced the water. He asked her about her son, whom she loved fiercely, though he lived in another city. She spoke of small joys and the ache of absence. He listened the way someone who wanted to understand listens, not the way someone who waits to reply listens. In that listening, she felt known. As their relationship warmed, Amelia's inbox filled with messages from people who had seen the kindness campaign. Stories arrived about mothers finding courage, people reconciling, employees deciding to treat each other with more care. Amelia read each letter like a gift. One in particular stood out. It came from a woman who had been in Amelia's class years ago, someone who wrote that a small kindness had changed her life, and that she had carried the lesson into motherhood. Amelia realized that her life, shaped by careful choices, had ripple effects she had never imagined. Then one afternoon, the anonymous giver decided to reveal themselves. The office hummed with curiosity. Amelia found a letter on her desk with a name she did not recognize, Rafael Ortiz. The envelope contained a simple note. Rafael wrote that he had worked at a different company across town and had once been on the brink of a decision that would have closed his heart to risk. He had seen Amelia's kindness in a moment she did not remember, and it had steered him toward empathy. He had followed her work for years, sending small tokens to remind her that ordinary actions could alter the course of someone's life. The revelation felt like a hand on her shoulder and a gust of wind at once. Amelia felt gratitude and a strange vulnerability. Raphael asked for nothing. He simply wanted her to know that her life mattered beyond what she could see. The admission freed Amelia from feeling watched and allowed her to accept the gifts as encouragement rather than as proof that she lived under scrutiny. With that fear gone, she could breathe easier. She and Sebastian became braver together. They planned small escapes, visits to galleries, and lazy Sunday breakfasts with markets full of good bread. They shared hopes for the future that did not demand immediate answers. Amelia allowed herself to think about a life that included partnership without losing her independence. Then life pressed against them with ordinary challenges. Sebastian faced a difficult decision at work about mentoring a young creative whose ideas were raw but brilliant. He worried about fairness and legacy. Amelia encouraged him to lean into mentorship, to shape someone without controlling them. She reminded him that courage sometimes looks like trust. His decision to mentor the young creative changed the shape of the department and helped build a culture that treasured growth over ego. Amelia's son called one day with news that made her heart lurch, a setback that required her to travel and offer support. She left without much notice, and Sebastian came to the airport to see her off. He squeezed her hand and asked if she wanted him to come with her. She shook her head and said, "This is something I need to do myself, but your faith means the world." They kissed in a quiet way that promised return and patience. During the trip, she had time to breathe and write. She penned an essay about small acts and the courage to stay present. When she returned, she found the office had grown in ways that felt like home. People treated each other with a touch more gentleness. She felt seen not because of the mistaken email, but because of the work she had quietly done. As months became a pattern of ordinary tenderness, Amelia reflected on how the mistake had changed her life. What began as an embarrassing misstep had become the hinge of a new chapter. She had learned to accept kindness without suspicion, to offer it without expectation, and to hold love with a steady hand. On a bright morning, Sebastian brought her to the rooftop garden, where small pots of herbs grew, and the city felt near and human. He handed her a book he knew she loved and said, "I hope you will always keep writing." She looked at him, surprised at how simple the wish was, and how deep its meaning. She answered, "And I hope you will always be you." He laughed and then turned serious. He reached into his pocket and produced a tiny key on a slender chain. It was the same shape as the key she had received with the wooden box months ago. He said, "I wanted you to have this because you once gave me the courage to try again." Amelia held the key and realized then that life sometimes arranges small miracles without fanfare. She understood that mistakes could open doors to honesty, and that being brave did not mean being without fear. It meant choosing tenderness despite it. She and Sebastian did not rush to labels. They built a life that allowed both freedom and belonging. The company continued to grow, not flawless, but better. And Amelia's work expanded into projects that let her write with a voice she had once hidden. People wrote to thank her for stories that helped them see the good in ordinary days. The anonymous letters dwindled as Raphael moved on, and as others began to practice their own quiet kindnesses. In the end, Amelia learned that living fully meant embracing the unexpected, keeping a center of self, and letting others in when they showed steady hands. She kept her notebook, now filled with lines and plans, and she continued to write. She learned to accept affection without fear, to lead with compassion, and to understand that safety could be built with someone who listened. The last scene closes not on a grand declaration, but on a table in the kitchen where Amelia writes a new paragraph and Sebastian hums a song he once loved. The city outside the window breathes with them. She looks up, smiles, and says softly, "Thank you for being here," he answers. "Thank you for being brave enough to send that wrong message." They laugh like people who have seen how small slips can lead to large truths. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more that explore the fragile, tender, and surprising turns of life, please like, subscribe, and stay with us for the next chapter of Ordinary Courage.